crucified with the cost of living crisis and the housing and accommodation crisis. Mortgage holders paying thousands extra in interest, hundreds of thousands of householders in arrears on their energy bills, families hammered with childcare costs, renters paying absolutely unaffordable rents if they can even find a place to live. But all of this hardship and suffering is happening at a time when the government has an unprecedented budget surplus, projected to be 16 billion next year, when the country is wealthier than it has ever been, according to the central bank, aggregate household wealth over €1 trillion this year, and when corporate profits have nearly quadrupled in the last 10 years. Yet in advance of the budget, the government is playing down expectations, saying we can't protect everybody against the cost of living hikes because it would cause inflation. Now, I want to put it to you ahead of the budget that this is a false and dishonest narrative. First of all, it is not inflationary simply to maintain the value of people's incomes. It is not inflationary to keep people out of poverty, and it is not inflationary to provide affordable housing. And secondly, that the real problem that you refuse to acknowledge is greedflation, profiteering by the banks, by the supermarket chains, by the property developers, by the corporate landlords. This is their problem. And I'll just take one example and ask you about it. The inequality in the distribution of wealth. I mentioned for the first time, according to the central bank, over €1 trillion in aggregate wealth. Helpfully, the central bank also set out the distribution of that wealth earlier this year. Do you know what they found? That the richest 10% of people in this country own 54% of all of that wealth. 10% own €540 billion more than all of the rest of society, the other 90% combined. That's the truth. That's why you won't give people what they need to address the suffering, the hardship and the housing crisis, because you're protecting a tiny few who have all the wealth and all the profits. So will you, to pay to fund the housing, affordable housing we need, to address poverty, to fund our public services, introduce a wealth tax to redistribute the wealth that exists in this country, to give it to the many and stop protecting the few who control all that wealth?
Barrett, please.
First of all, I would dispute the Deputy's presentation of the facts, or the facts as he puts them, or the position that he's adopting here. First of all, the government is very committed to protecting people against the cost of living increases. Last year we provided €12 billion in respect of cushioning the impact of rising prices on households, on businesses and farmers. The ESRI, and I note you didn't quote the ESRI, found that once-off measures announced as part of Budget 23, and if you combine that with the core increases, insulated most households from rising energy prices last winter. And if you look at the lowest four income deciles were cushioned against the inflationary spiral last year by the measures that we took, the combination of core social protection measures, public service pay agreements, and you take tax relief, and then the once-off. Combine all of that, the lowest income groups were cushioned. That's ESRI data, not my data, Deputy. And it is our intention in this budget to continue to cushion people, because next year living standards will rise above inflation. Inflation is on a downward trajectory over the next 12 months. And when you combine the various measures that we will take, with pay and tax relief and so on, and all of that, living standards next year, it is our projection, will increase. The government's commitment is to a fair budget. It's fair to workers, and we need to be fair to those who are out there working, to our tax measures that we will adopt, and indeed in terms of other supports that we can provide and will provide, both in terms of a once-off cost of living package married to then, in terms of those on social welfare protection measures, to enable them to come through this winter. Because certain prices, are no question, are high, and people are under a lot of pressure. On housing, we have record investment in housing in this country. We have very high revenues coming in. They are tapering a bit. That's not government cushioning or managing expectations. The figures speak for themselves. In other words, the significant increases we had in corporation tax, we still have very healthy corporation tax, healthy income tax coming in, all signs of a buoyant economy, because we have full employment in the economy. Now, I suggest respectfully that the measures that you are proposing more generally in the economy, I think would, over time, undermine the employment story in Ireland. Because I think you're anti-enterprise, clearly. You don't believe in a free market economy. You don't believe that enterprises should make profit. I'm talking about even small to medium-sized companies. You're against trade deals. Most small to medium-sized countries in this country want to engage in free trade. You're against it. So I think your policies would undermine the enterprise economy that has resulted in very high employment in this country and career progression.
Deputy Boyd Barrett.
What I don't believe is that in one of the wealthiest countries in the world, it is acceptable that we have record numbers of families and children, worst of all, living in homeless accommodation. I don't accept that a whole generation of young people are being crucified with unaffordable rents and can never hope to own their own home. I don't accept that there are now more than 250,000 people who are in arrears on their energy bills because of energy price hikes. I don't accept that 17% of the population in this country suffer deprivation. I don't accept that workers have lost about 10% in real terms of their income because of cost of living hikes, while the corporations have seen their profits quadruple. While ESB, 679 million in the first 6 months of this year, double what it earned 2 years ago. And the banks are recording extraordinary profits. And as I said, our figures are from the central bank, when the richest 10% of our population own more wealth than everybody else. Are you going to address that inequality? Are you going to use the wealth that exists in our society to actually protect working people, pensioners, students, the least well off, from the hammering they are getting from the cost of living crisis, and address the housing disaster?
We addressed the cost of living issues last year in an unprecedented way, and in a way that no other government in Europe did, in terms of the scale of our intervention, in a whole range of measures at social protection, double payments, all of that. 12 billion alone last year. And we're going to do similar actions this year in terms of interventions to protect people. And it is our view that living standards will improve in 2024. And Deputy, you need to acknowledge that, notwithstanding the different political ideology which you're entitled to have, we have 2.64 million people working in this country today. Our economy added nearly 90,000 jobs over the past year. For a total of more than 500,000 jobs since we entered government in 2020, 500,000 additional jobs. The share of people in Ireland who have jobs is at a record high of 74%, with unemployment at an exceptionally low rate of 4.2%. Youth unemployment is the lowest on record and amongst the lowest in the European Union, and our population rose by nearly 100,000 people over the year to the end of April 2023. That's an alternative.
Thank you.
And there's much more I could say. But we are committed in the budget to protecting people, particularly those on lowest incomes, from the very significant and acknowledged pressures of cost of living increases.
We move now to the region.